welcome to From a Woman to a Leader, a podcast dedicated to discussing the challenges and providing tips for women in tech leadership. Hi, I'm your host, Limor Bergman-Gross, and in each episode, we'll hear from other successful women in tech, sharing their stories, insights, and advice. Join us as we empower each other to reach our full potential in the tech industry. So hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of From a Woman to a Leader. And I have a great privilege today to speak with Milena Berry. And Milena, on top of being a great friend, is the CEO and co-founder of PowerToFly. She is not just the CEO, but she's also a board member. She's an investor. She's a mentor to other founders. And she's a proud mother of 4 and married to Andrea. She cares about women, she cares about transgender rights and a lot of other things. And today we are going to talk about running a business in times of uncertainty. So hi, Milena, how are you?
Great. Thanks, Limor. Thanks for having me. It's such an honor. It's been such a great relationship over the years, and it's totally an honor to be here today. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Milena. And let's just start with maybe share our listeners a little bit about your background and how your background influenced your journey and decision eventually to start PowerToFly about almost 10 years ago, right? It's almost coming to 10 years.
Yeah, I can't believe it, but totally coming up on 10 years. Sure. So, well, first of all, to kind of frame the conversation, I wanted to take a moment and just with one sentence explain what PowerToFly does, right?
Sure, absolutely.
PowerToFly is a diversity talent acquisition platform connecting underrepresented talent to great careers. And underrepresented talent, of course, can be defined as women, non-binary, transgender, LGBTQI+, somebody with disability, Black person, Asian woman. It's really about connecting underrepresented talent to great careers. That's kind of our tagline. So how did my background get me to starting PowerToFly? So I'm originally from Bulgaria. I left Bulgaria when I was 19 years old to go to college in the Netherlands. And again, in terms of my own identity, I identify as a woman, particularly woman in tech, as a parent of 4. I identify as queer, married to a transgender woman, and I'm also an immigrant, right? And really, it was about 10 years ago that I had started to reflect on my privilege and my luck and how lucky I had been to still be in the workplace, having a great career, having raising a beautiful family at the same time, not being pushed out of the workplace. And I started thinking, what has it been? Why was I one of the lucky ones? Why is my story a story of hope? And how can that story of hope be translated to more of the world's population? And I realized that a lot of that had to do with finding a company that cares about underrepresented talent, that cares about providing a work environment that's going to allow you to thrive, not just survive. And I set out on a mission to build a platform to connect underrepresented folks to more companies that care. So there was a clear need for underrepresented folks. There was a clear need for companies, and kind of with my background and my experience, I got inspired to connect the two.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the introduction. For those of you who don't know PowerToFly, you should go right now, type powertofly.com and look at that incredible company that I had a privilege also working with. So thank you so much, Milena, for what you do for all of us, right? I mean, all of us that are underrepresented in any way, shape, or form. And I wanted to ask you, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when you start your company, and how did you overcome them?
So I think the very first challenge is making the leap into entrepreneurship. I think that's very scary. Obviously, you're leaving a secure salary to start something completely unknown. And I definitely want to recognize the privilege that, I was in a place in time in my life that I was able to take that risk. I know a lot of talented people who aren't able to. And so there was definitely a little bit of luck involved, although also a lot of hard work. And I definitely subscribe by the adage of, the harder I worked, the luckier I got. But I also want to recognize that there was a lot of privilege involved as well. And I think that's very important for us to recognize and to continue to amplify the voices of those who don't have that privilege. I think probably tactically as a founder, I think it's so important to know what you don't know, which I think is really, really hard as well, but to kind of do a true assessment of what are you good at, what are you not good at. I have always been a quant, right? Finance, spreadsheets, whenever I have to procrastinate, I procrastinate in spreadsheets. I was never great at storytelling or branding or marketing. And there was clearly a gap that I needed to figure out how do I bridge that gap when starting PowerToFly. I was also very, very lucky to find the right co-founder. And again, I looked for a co-founder who's going to complement my skills and be able to be the storyteller and the brand creator that I wasn't good at. So that kind of worked out for me, finding the right co-founder, Catherine Zaleski. You should look her up. And then finally, I think, just surrounding myself with the right counsel. For example, very early on in our journey, a couple of months after Catherine and I got together, we made a decision to go out and raise capital. We've raised capital 3 times now. I'm very, very proud of that milestone and achievement. We all know the numbers of how underrepresented founders are such a tiny percentage of the funded startups out there. So just being part of that group is a huge, feather in my cap, I suppose is the right expression. But it wasn't just about the money, right? When we decided to go out and raise, we wanted the counsel. We wanted to surround ourselves with a network of people who have been there, done that multiple times, and to learn from them in our entrepreneurship journey. I will tell you the amount of things I did not know 10 years ago. It's amazing how much I've learned in the experience in the last 10 years. But certainly, I just kind of knew what I don't know, knew when to ask, was not shy to say, I don't know, can you teach me? And to ask, I still don't understand, please tell me more. And I think that's a big part of kind of keeping on learning and keeping on growing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned finding a co-founder, and Catherine Zaleski is incredible. You should definitely look her up, and identifying what you're good at and what maybe are the skills that you need to complement with the co-founder and with others that you surround yourself. And you mentioned this counsel. And I wanted to ask you a follow-up question on what you said. How do you go about and find, for a woman who wants to start her own business, how do you go about and find a co-founder? How do you go about and find that counsel of people that can support you?
Yeah, for me, it was just leveraging my network, right? Like I went to a lot of networking events. I went to an entrepreneurship festival where I was basically practicing my pitch, and the first person I said one thing, they said, but that doesn't really resonate with me. Well, I changed the pitch to the second person I said that, they said, but that piece doesn't resonate. Okay, I changed the pitch again. So you have to iterate, you have to meet a lot of people, and you have to figure out who is kind of the head nodder, I call them, who just say, what you're doing is great, good job, keep doing it, versus the people who say, what you're doing is great, it has some really good components. However, have you thought of this, right? And that's what Catherine was amazing at. And that's when I knew that she's going to be the right co-founder. She didn't stop talking when I presented the idea to her. She basically took over the conversation, got really excited about it, and said, this is going to be much bigger, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's kind of where I knew that you have to find not just the people who are going to say, yeah, yes, great, but who are going to say, yes, but, or have you thought of this too? And it's just about kind of, go to the people and ask them for connections as well.
Absolutely. So tapping your network and finding people who will challenge you, who will try to kind of poke holes in your great pitch.
Yes, exactly.
And help you validate it.
Absolutely.
Wow. And that's incredible. And let's kind of shift gear to what we wanted to talk about today, about running a business in times of uncertainty. And let's start with COVID-19, with the pandemic that happened like about 3 years ago and has been very challenging for companies. And I know it has been very challenging also for PowerToFly. And let's talk about the pandemic and how has COVID-19 pandemic impacted your business and what steps have you taken to adapt to the changing circumstances?
So there's a word I learned since my times at Avaz. That was the global nonprofit I was the chief technology officer of before I co-founded PowerToFly. And I'm basically also back their board member, but I learned a valuable word while working there, and that's the word crisitunity, which is that in every crisis, there is an opportunity. And I think that mindset of crisitunity and kind of trying to find the opportunity in the crisis was really important in how I navigated that times of uncertainty mentally, and why I was able to lead the company through these challenging times. I mean, the truth is that we had been preaching, improved diversity through remote work at PowerToFly since onset, right? Like since 2014. It took until 2020 for the majority of companies to finally try it out and see how it actually, they were able to do it. There were so many naysayers before. And so in some ways, the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 really opened more doors for us as more and more companies embraced that idea of remote work as a business. It was very uncertain time in terms of finances. I mean, our business in talent acquisition is very cyclical. We have kind of a bell curve starting slow during Q1, then Q2 and Q3 are higher, and then it goes down in Q4 as companies start again stop spending as they plan for what they're going to do next year. And so we were just on an upswing after Q1 when the pandemic hit, and Q2 was awful for us in 2020. So we had to deal with, a lot of companies were doing layoffs or furloughs out there. We didn't want to go through that motion, but we had to ask all of our employees to take a salary deferral, which is also very uncomfortable as a leader to go and ask you people to take less. And we also had to cut some commission structures in order to basically know that we're going to be in the clear. Luckily, the economy kind of bounced because of the government intervention and all the stimulus that was put into the economy. But, it was probably the shortest time of uncertainty I've ever been a part of, and certainly shorter than what we're experiencing right now. But, again, taking a look at our finances and projecting a slower velocity of revenue was very, very important, and kind of figuring out how to manage the profit and the P&L, the profit and loss statement during that time. We also it was a moment to innovate. So I think and I can talk a little bit more about that, a little bit later, but, for example, telling our customers who are used to doing on-site events with us, hey, it's okay. You can still get the same results by holding the event virtually. And we're going to been doing this for so many years. It's going to be okay. Trust us. Let us hold your hand throughout that process was really big. And, we basically were able to continue delivering value for our customer, but in an online fashion. And then finally, that was the year that we launched our summit offering, which is really amazing and draws a huge amount of audience for us every year. And that was born out of, the innovation of the moment of like, hey, we're all feeling a little down right now. We need an event to bring us all together to figure out how we're going to reset, how we're going to reboot. And so Diversity Reboot, our flagship summit, was born that year, where we put together so many, thought leaders to discuss, how to not forget about diversity in uncertain times. That was kind of the idea.
Wow, so many things. And I love the term crisitunity. It's a great term. And obviously, you took the advantage that you have of working fully remote and know what it is to work remote before everyone else knew, right? I mean, and taking an innovative and uncertain step, right, to start the Diversity Reboot Summit and launch something completely new, not like today that everyone does virtual events. It was relatively novel back then.
Yep.
And that's incredible. And I wanted to ask you also, on top of that, like, what are some key decisions? I mean, if there are anything else that you missed that you made that helped PowerToFly stay on track?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm trying to remember now, but I feel like, we grew 50% that year, which was like, again, like wasn't 100%, but given that the rest of the companies were tanking in talent acquisition in particular, I think it was a great year for us. And I think, again, being conservative with our finances and basically flashing down our projections so that we can figure out how to manage the expenses was like really, really important. And just kind of not giving up. And I don't know, like it was certainly insane time for me personally. We had left an apartment building literally overnight. We didn't feel safe there anymore. We loaded up the whole family. I have 4 kids in a van and moved to my co-founder's home. So we were living literally in somebody else's home for 5 months that year. And I think one of my coping mechanisms during that time was to just work harder so that we can make it through this time. So I remember putting my toddler to sleep and then going back to the couch and working on inviting speakers for the summit night after night after night. It was so, but it was that moment of like, sometimes we all need to mobilize and work harder in these moments that are really challenging so that you can find that opportunity within the crisis. All right. Just sitting back and saying, hey, it's all going to get figured out. It's not the right way to navigate a crisis in uncertain times.
Absolutely. So taking the driver's seat, and basically you made ways to make it happen. So it was a conscious decision. Yeah, it's a tough times, but we're going to figure that out. We're going to find ways to move forward.
Yeah, totally.
And that's what you did. And I wanted to also ask you about being a female CEO, right? I mean, we don't have enough, and not even close. I mean, we all know that we have less and less women in executive roles in the C-suite, and even less as founders or co-founders. What challenges have you faced as a woman, as a CEO that is a woman, and how do you overcome them?
So I'm very lucky because we're a family of 2 moms. So I think in many ways, we really share a lot of the responsibility that more traditional households dump on the woman. And, everything from, and why I'm saying, why I'm talking about my family here is because particularly in 2020 during the pandemic, it was a very challenging time to be a working parent, let alone a CEO parent. And by the way, we're 2 CEOs in one household. So interesting year for sure. And so we had 4 kids at home navigating tough business moment. And it wasn't that one of us was a stay-at-home mom and the other one was working, right? Both of us are working full-time, navigating a tough moment in their own companies. And so frankly, there was a lot of time that it was really tough to just keep it together, to deal with that constant change. I don't know. I believe that, obviously humans, we've survived over the years and over the eons, rather, over the millennia because we are able to adapt, right? But I also think that the pace of our ability to adapt genetically is frankly like slower than the change that we've been dealing with in the last few years. And so that is what creates a lot of anxiety and stress, and not just in us, but in all of our employees. So we're dealing with the personal stress, you're dealing with a workforce that's stressed. And by the way, this is not just a challenging time for parents who are like, obviously they have to multitask homeschooling and feeding everybody and, making sure the siblings don't fight while you're running a business. Also, on the other side, I was dealing with single employees who were going absolutely, crazy. They weren't feeling well because they were lonely. They were missing the social interaction. So on one hand, some people were going, insane, dealing with too much family at home. The other ones were too lonely. So there was no necessarily a happy medium for anybody that year. And I think, these were probably some of the challenges, I think, to kind of try to navigate everything at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking about employees, how have you maintained their morale during such challenging times? What steps have you taken to support their well-being?
I think the one thing I learned is that it's not a one size fits all for employees. And especially nowadays, I don't know, we need to have customized accommodations for everybody almost, right? Like you can have patterns, but again, like just listen to what they need and how they need to be supported. And so some folks might need a mental health stipend, other folks might need, I don't know, might, need more time with their pet, or, other folks might need to take a trip to be with their elders. And that's my story person recently, and some folks are, just welcoming a new baby and in that the beginning of motherhood in their face. So like everybody kind of needs a different thing based on where they are with their life and what are their needs. And I think just being empathetic and to be more forgiving to when somebody kind of loses it at work and perhaps is acting in a way that would be unprofessional in a traditional setting, to just say, you know what, we all have a lot on our mind right now. Everybody's dealing with a lot of stress. Let's, we'll mention this was not appropriate. Like, don't, take it against that person that, they blew their casket. There's a lot going on in life right now. And I think that empathy to say, like, we're all feeling the strain of these challenging, uncertain times, let's be kind to each other, is definitely a helpful guiding light. Not to say that it's not challenging still, and we're not dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. We still are. There's still a lot of anxiety in the workplace, and I think this year even more perhaps than COVID. I don't know, but with all the layoffs happening in the market, everybody's really, really anxious right now, and we just have to keep remembering to calm ourselves down and to know that there's things in our control, there's things outside of our control. Just breathe through the anxiety, and you're not alone.
Absolutely. And it's so important to be empathetic to employees and always assume best intentions. I always, when I had challenge with people I manage, I always assumed best intentions and try to really understand what is going through in their lives, right? I mean, because a lot of times, as you said, some behaviors may not be appropriate, but when you look at all the circumstances around it, there's some reason that someone is behaving the way they are, and you need to have empathy and be curious also.
Yeah, totally.
To them. Yeah, and these times is also very challenging for sure. I mean, it's not like and now we are in a time that it's so easy to run a company. And how do you manage? I mean, after COVID, and now we have obviously the financial situation right now. And how do you manage to maintain the focus on the long-term goals while dealing with challenges that we have today, even nowadays?
So I was thinking about it a little bit before we jumped on the line, and I think having that management team, first of all, we have an executive leadership team, right? So I might be the CEO, but I'm also accountable to my leadership team members in terms of what I deliver for them as CEO. I think that's really helpful. So kind of having a regular cadence on a leadership meeting when you're kind of being also held accountable to what you're contributing, not just, it's not a one-way street management, right? Like, it's a two-way street. And then also having our board is very, very helpful, right? Like, we just restructured our board last year after the Series B raised. And so in some way we have a new board. Well, in many ways we have a new board. Like, there's only one board member who is the same as before. And so having that regular cadence, and by the way, we meet once a quarter, but because of the uncertainty in the markets, we have been really meeting every 2 to 4 weeks with our investors right now to say, how are things going? Where are things heading? Give us the macro trends. What are you thinking? Are we spending on the right areas? And I think having this, being accountable to another party is very, very helpful, to be honest, as in terms of trying to maintain focus. I will say that, yes, we've had to make a lot of, tough decisions in these challenging times. And I think what are my North Stars as I try to make these tough decisions? Number one, protecting financial independence, right? I think especially today, you cannot assume you will raise capital ever again, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very few, even less companies than before are going to get funded. Of course, a much small percentage of them are going to be on underrepresented founders, but, just again, assume and you won't raise again and protect your financial independence, which means that absolutely have a 4 to 5 year financial model out, be conservative in your assumptions of growth, and hence also be conservative in your expenditures. And, if you're able to overachieve on your growth, then you can spend more, but like, protect your financial independence. That's been kind of hammered into my mind from all of my advisors over the last 6 months. And number two, I don't know, I'm one of those founders that always gets excited about the next big thing we can build, the next big thing we can innovate on. And as we talked about earlier, that has served us well in many times. But I also, if I have to be very honest, I'm sure I have wasted a lot of company resources in kind of going after an idea that never panned out. And so we have had to really focus on some of our product features that we want to develop this year, and to say, we can't boil the ocean, we can't do it all. Let's just choose this squadron and get really, really good at that. What's our core value proposition, right? Because we are a data intelligence platform, we are a 360 diversity talent solution, but the core of PowerToFly is diversity talent acquisition. And so before we build features that are, more encompassing on data or more encompassing on the full talent lifecycle, we need to make sure that we're damn good at diversity talent acquisition. And so right now this year, we're making that effort to really hone in on that piece and make sure that we have a, software solution that scales on that front before we can go out and build anything else, because we have limited resources.
Absolutely. And you mentioned two I heard kind of two main things. First of all, being conservative and not overspend, like we see, to be honest, in a lot of large corporations. I mean, I have people who work in very large companies. I don't want to mention names, but they say, yeah, we hired like crazy. We spent so much money, and now the companies are forced to cut their expenses rapidly and let go of many people. So being conservative and not assume, right? Not assume that we're going to raise more money or that the financial circumstances will remain the way they are, right? 2021 was a good year for everyone. And then we started seeing the slowdown. And also you mentioned finding your core and identifying what is your core value proposition and focus on that, which is so critical. And what helps you find that core? Because I know one of the challenges I have all the time is focus, and decide what not to do, right? This is like, I felt always so hard. What helps you find that, core and decide, no, this is not something we're going to do, even though we want to?
I mean, to be honest, it's, again, having a trusted team who can have that conversation of what is core and what is not. But at the end of the day, I also have this tagline, the mission is the metric, right? So like we go back to our mission, and at the end, our mission is about connecting underrepresented talent to great careers. And so there's a lot adjacent to that mission that can feed into that. But the bottom line is, are we great at, again, getting jobs in the hands of underrepresented talent? So that is the core of the mission, and kind of going back to that has been really great. And what we've had to, decide to drop some things, as painful as it was.
Yeah, that's great. And we're close to the end of the episode, and I wanted to ask you if you have like one piece of advice you want to give to women entrepreneurs facing challenges in their businesses. What kind of advice would you give them?
The whole point is change is the only constant these days, and you have to keep evolving to survive, right? As a company, as a professional, etc. And so just stop wanting things to remain the same, to be how they used to be. Like, just embrace the change that the world's throwing our way. And by the way, it's accelerating every year, it's happening even faster. And so, I don't see that trend slowing down in any way. And so just embrace it and figure out, what do I need to do to keep learning, to keep evolving, to keep being relevant as a company, as a product, as a professional. And then the second thing is going to go back to kind of me repeating a nugget I just gave you on the mission is the metric. Define what your mission is as a professional, as a company, as an entrepreneur, and really guide all of the decisions around that. Like, it's actually quite interesting once you write it down, to then the next decision you have to take to say, does this help my mission or does it not help the mission? If it helps the mission, I'm going to do it. Doesn't help the mission, I'm not going to do it. And I think those are kind of two quick, actionable pieces of advice I might have for the audience.
That's great. Thank you so much, Milena. And how can people contact you, read more about you and about PowerToFly? And if there's anything you want to share about PowerToFly that people should be looking at right now?
Well, thank you, first of all, for providing this forum. You can contact me on LinkedIn. I accept pretty much all my connection requests. So feel free to request a connection there. Milena Berry, Berry. You can also check out PowerToFly.com, which is our website. There is a great experience, both from kind of a talent perspective as well as from a company perspective. If you work at a company who wants to do better at the diversity goals, I would really appreciate a lead into that, and hopefully we can partner up. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you. I definitely want to hear how this episode resonated or what I can do better as a CEO or as PowerToFly as a company.
Thank you so much, Milena. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. And I'll share all the links on the episode.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of From a Woman to a Leader. This is your host, Limor Bergman-Gross, and I want to encourage you to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Limor Bergman, and let me know, what do you think about the episodes? Feel free also to comment on Apple Podcasts and tell me, what do you want me to talk about? Which guests do you want me to bring? I really appreciate that, and have a wonderful day.